Hello, everyone. Happy Hump Day. We're excited to have y'all joining us. We are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Erin Hardick. I'm the Senior Researcher and Content Strategist at ZPrime, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, AMI and the Future of Grid Modernization, presented by Black and Veatch. Before we get into the content for today, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping notes. If you're having trouble viewing the slides or hearing us, usually refreshing your browser will do the trick. In this new age of video conferencing, I think we're all very aware of the possibility of poor connection or cutting in and out. So if you do miss anything, don't worry. We will have the full webinar playback available shortly after we wrap up. In the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box, and we will take the last 15 minutes of today's webinar to answering audience questions. So you can use that Q&A box to submit your questions anytime during the webinar, but we will get to as many as we can at the end during those last 15 minutes. Okay, so now on to our topic and speakers. Smart meter adoption rates have soared in the past decade and which has been foundational for digital transformation for utilities and really the future of the grid. There are currently more than 100 million smart meters deployed in the United States. However, in a recent ACEEE report, too many utilities are underutilizing the capabilities of AMI. And utilities have the opportunity to break down organizational silos to improve operations, engage better with customers, and better integrate technologies that are critical for the future of our grid. So our speakers today will talk about how utilities can get the most from their AMI systems and programs. They'll discuss the steps Hydro Ottawa has taken to maximize the benefits of AMI, challenges utilities face, and what steps utilities can take to overcome those challenges. So here on the screen, you can see our thought leaders for today's conversation. We have Kevin Cornish. Kevin is the Senior Managing Director for Black & Veatch Management and Consulting. And Robert Renshaw. Robert is the Manager of Metering Systems for Hydro Ottawa. A little bit about each of those organizations. Hydro Ottawa Limited is a regulated electricity local distribution company operating in the city of Ottawa and the village of Castleman. As the third largest municipally owned electrical utility in Ontario, Hydro Ottawa Limited maintains one of the safest, most reliable, and cost-effective electricity distribution systems in the province, serving approximately 340,000 residential and commercial customers across 1,116 square kilometers. And Black & Veatch Management Consulting provides integrated strategy, transaction advisory, business operations, regulatory, and technology solutions for the power, water, and oil and gas industries. As a global company, Black & Veatch has more than 11,000 professionals and a market presence of more than 100 years. So before I turn things over to our speakers, which I will do shortly, I just wanted to share some ZPrime research related to today's topic. And this first slide, we're looking at utility plans for investments over the next 36 months. And you can see there at the top, when it comes to AMI, 23% of utilities expect to increase their investment in AMI by 50% or more in the next 36 months. And 15% of utilities expect to increase their investment by 25% or more. And then on the second line there, you see data and analytics. So 13% of utilities plan to increase their investment by 50% or more in data and analytics over the next 36 months. And 26% plan to increase their investment by 25% or more over the next 36 months. And our speakers today will talk about maybe how those investments will be applied. So in this next slide, we're looking at how utilities plan to use data and analytics. So we just looked at how they're going to be increasing their investments, but how are those investments going to be applied? In the most popular areas utilities are looking to apply those investments are monitoring and optimizing the grid. 45% of utilities said they'll be doing that. Improving customer delivery, asset management, and improved reliability are the top 4 areas that utilities are looking to use data and analytics to kind of modernize the grid and their business model. Again, I think our speakers today will touch on what those investments mean in those areas. And then our last slide today, we're just looking at some of the top challenges for digital modernization and business model transformation within utilities. You can see there at the top that budget limitations and business benefits and ROI are the top 2 challenges. As utilities attempt modernization efforts, they will need to expand on existing use cases to create more ROI opportunities. And towards the end of our conversation, our speakers will discuss what some of those new use cases could be. So with that, I will get our speakers involved. Robert, I will turn things over to you first. Can you share with us your perspective at Hydro Ottawa on the current state of AMI and how Hydro Ottawa is using technology and data to improve and advance optimizing AMI?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So right now at Hydro Ottawa, we've kind of come to a transition point. We were one of the early adopters in Ontario for smart meters. So about 2012, we invested heavily and put in a whole system of first generation, and now as we've worked through second generation smart meters. We've come to the point now where AMI, we want more data, we want more ability to work with those meters. We want that infrastructure to do more. And those older meters are coming up, like they aren't going to be making them anymore. They're coming to end of life. We've basically maxed out our ability to get the data that we can from those meters, and we need to move forward. So we invested heavily in the future. So what our plans are over the next 5 years is we're going to upgrade our headend. That's the software. I'm sure most people will know what this is, but it's the software end that allows us to read those meters and pull the data in, potentially do some analytics, basically filter the data that we want. In addition, we have a mesh network currently. That mesh network was good for the limited data that is coming back from our current meters. We're going to put in a much more robust system that's going to be able to pull back a lot more of that bandwidth, a lot more of that data from those new meters we want to put in. So those are two big capital investments that we're going to be making moving forward. We've made the AMI an integral part of our smart metering, our smart grid process. I sit on the smart grid committee within our group, and if you think about it, these are the most numerous pieces of equipment, sensors, switches that are in the system that can bring back data and can be utilized across the company. So we are looking at this as a future investment. We also need to make sure that that investment brings back value to the company. We have a responsibility to the shareholder and to the customers themselves to make sure that as we do these investments, they're getting a benefit from it. So that's kind of where we're at right now with our AMI thoughts.
Thank you. And Kevin, from your perspective on the utility consulting side, what is Black & Veatch seeing from other utilities, and how are some of these topics maybe different in the US versus Canada?
Yes, thanks, Aaron. As Robert said, I mean, Robert did a good job of presenting what is facing a large percentage of the utility industry here. A decade ago, the focus was on what's the value of smart metering or AMI, how do we justify it? It was on procurement, implementation, as a larger percentage of the market has systems that have been in place for years or approaching decades, there's two things we're seeing. One is utilities asking themselves or being asked by other stakeholders, regulators, are we getting the full value out of our existing investment? If not, well, why? And how can we do that? And then, as Robert alluded to, you need to look at the system that you have. What was its lifespan designed for? Is it functionally and technically still delivering the value that you need? And what sort of reinvestments do you need to make? And we see that there's a lot of utilities that are now looking at this, what we refer to as AMI Day 2. You've had the system in place. It's been providing meter-to-cash functionality. A lot of utilities have integrated it into their outage management systems or some of their core systems, bringing back data. But are they getting full value is one question. And what can they do to expand upon that? And what sort of reinvestment do they need to make as aspects of the system start to age out? Your question about differences between Canada and the US, there are some. Without getting too technical, there's Industry Canada and Measurement Canada, which are regulatory bodies that have significant, I'll say, control and impact over the Canadian market that are really missing in the US. And then many of the larger utilities in Canada are provincial utilities. So for the US participants, that's basically like a state municipality, if you will. And so there's an element of political, public good, social perspective that comes into a lot of these large investment decisions that are beyond just kind of the financial rate of return.
Thank you, Kevin. So let's talk about current technology challenges. Robert, what are the biggest challenges and opportunities ahead for Hydro Ottawa as you work to optimize your AMI and asset management technologies?
So there's quite a bit of challenge. There's quite a bit of opportunity. So when it comes to the first thing, I know you said technology, but it's budgeting, making sure that you put the money aside and that it gets approved through, and the importance of why you want to make this investment is made to the shareholder or to the regulator, and we can get that approved. So that's a big challenge. You've got a lot of work to go through to actually prove that this is something necessary. Some of the other challenges are a lot of data, and a lot of utilities aren't set up currently to pull that kind of data back on their own systems. We are lucky here at Hydro Ottawa. We have been working on a fiber optic implementation throughout all of our substations, from our buildings, headquarters, operation centers, allowing us to now have some significant capacity to bring that data back to sort of the mothership in a way. But now we still have to tap into that. So the biggest challenge is you've made a massive investment in a whole bunch of physical assets out the system, and those assets aren't going to be able to talk and provide the data you want into the new headend system we talked about, and really into the new communications system. So we're looking at doing some pole top nodal gatekeepers. It's going to increase our ability to reach out. We are a very wide company in a sense. We cover a lot of actual square kilometers compared to the number of customers we have. So we've got to have a system that can reach out to all of those rural areas in addition to downtown Ottawa, which is a very urbanized environment. It is a city. So for us, it's about making an investment in changing out the meters. That is a long-term investment. That's an investment that we plan to do over 10 to 15 years. It's pretty tough to convince a regulator or your chiefs and board of directors that you should spend $80 million to replace all of the meters this year or next year. So that's a big one. Planning to make sure you do that. Targeting the areas that you're going to put the new meters in, so you can actually start testing the capabilities of all these wonderful new pieces of equipment you're putting out in the field. And then testing how those pieces of data coming into your head end, how do I make sure that that information in that detail and timely gets to my SCADA group, gets to my system office so that they can make those decisions, or that data can be used in a smart grid or even some kind of Flizzr system, anything like that, where it's making decisions based on data that's coming in from the field. What are some of the opportunities? I think there are massive numbers of opportunities depending on what, in our case, the regulator has. Are they going to offer incentives? Does the government do a few things that offer incentives for electric vehicles, net metering, maybe virtual net metering, a number of things that we could see. But these are data points that we can then bring back and maybe make those things work. Some of the other opportunities are, if I've got the data, I know you've put a specific piece of equipment in your home, and we know that there's a way to save you money or bring you safely onto the grid. We can see that data and offer those things. So we can start partnering with our communications group. We can partner with our billing groups, and then even our assets. So now we're potentially looking at health of switches or pieces of equipment out in the system. Maybe a transformer that's starting to get old or having some issues, and the downstream meters can pick up. There's lots of things that we can do. So asset management, definitely a thing. Within the smart grid, I think there's lots of value, lots of opportunities for us.
Thanks, Robert. So Kevin, from a technology perspective, what advice and direction do you provide to clients to help them kind of manage through the challenges of managing these technologies? And can you maybe share some examples of best practice recommendations?
Yeah, Aaron. To piggyback on a comment Robert made, you're putting a lot of physical assets out in the ground, but most utility physical assets, poles, wires, pipes, long lifespan, very low utility involvement. You put them out there and they just stay. The closest I would allude to with AMI is distribution automation solutions, where you put them out there, they're more computing devices, they have a more limited life, and you're connected to them all the time. The reason I point that out is, as Robert said, you put a system in, 10 years later, if you go back to your management and say, okay, we're ready to make this major upgrade in the system and we need another $100 million. Normally the response is, what are you talking about? Because it doesn't seem that long ago. 10 years is not that long in the utility world. So we just put the system in. What we've gone to kind of from a philosophy standpoint is really you need to look at AMI as a program of continuous reinvestment or continuous improvement, if you will. And that's not how a lot of the initial systems were designed. They were, most of them were 15-year project life, life cycle financial models that said we're going to do all this work initially, and then there's certain O&M required to keep the system going and achieving the use cases. But most models didn't approach it with kind of cycles of reinvestment, other than maybe replacing the collectors or head-in upgrades and things. And what we're seeing in the industry is whether utilities have deployed the system 3 or 4 years ago or 10 years ago, they're looking at it, how can we get more out of it? Well, sometimes getting more out of it means making some investments in it. Because if you look at meters, they've gone from analog to digital to these, what I would call edge computing devices. Some of the meters you can download apps to. They bring back a tremendous amount of data. But if you put the system in more than a year or two ago, those aren't the meters you have. And so if you believe that you can get value out of some of those, you're not likely to do a full system deployment, but you may do some focused upgrade. And so the philosophy or the mentality isn't kind of the full system replacement, but it's a reinvestment as required to extract more value out of it. And that usually means focused on specific classes of customers or types of customers, and driven by new use cases. And so we see that more focused approach. And as your introductory slide show, one of the biggest challenges is budgeting and rate, return on it. If you try to do a full massive deployment, that may not be the best investment return. But if you look at it as small capital investment to extract more specific value for specific use cases, a lot of times you can show that positive return, get a smaller amount of capital in the next budget cycle, and make those incremental investments over time.
Thank you for bringing that up, Kevin. I actually did want to touch on that before we moved on to our next section, was that budget issue, because Robert, you mentioned that as a top challenge as well. So just a quick follow-up question before we move on that I'd like to get both of your perspectives on. Robert, if you could go first. As Kevin mentioned, these are continuous investments, continuous improvements. How do you appropriately budget for something that you know is continuous and ongoing? How do you do that?
Wow, that's a great question. How do we do that? So we hadn't thought of previously where we would have to go and redo the whole system. I think before, when you just had these mechanical meters out there, or even just dumb meters, you just replace them as you need to. You just go out and replace it. There we go. We continue. We'll read it and off we go. Now you get into the point where the current system is, we have a sampling program here in Ontario and Canada, actually, that's mandated by Measurement Canada. So we go through and pull out a certain number as required and replace them. So we can budget for that. How do you budget for a full headend upgrade? Well, you now need to think about that, because when we installed it however many years ago, I'm not sure everybody was like, oh yeah, we're going to buy this, and then the obsolescence of the actual headend will be there. So we go through a 5-year planning cycle. We propose projects through our rate application, and we basically have to make business cases. How does it benefit the company? How does it benefit the shareholder? And how does it benefit the customer, right? Just making sure we get there, because they are the people that we need to be serving. So the other piece of it is that you're actually putting this project up against all the other projects at the company, right? You have to evaluate them versus what's the value of something else. You talk about new poles. How many poles do we replace this year, or how many don't, because we're going to put the AMI in? So what is the trade-off? So you have to make good business cases. In our case, what we were able to do is we actually had Black & Veatch come in. We went through the plan. We've got a plan right out into 2026. We laid that out. We integrated it with part of our smart grid initiatives. We got buy-in from the chiefs, and off we went. Right now, we are part of a larger program. We are an integral part of it. The AMI is integrated directly into what our smart grid is going to be in the future. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it does, and we're about to get into kind of more around what impacts, what are some of that criteria around investment decisions. But Kevin, do you have any thoughts before we move on around like how do you budget for something that's continuously going on?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points I'd make. One is this doesn't necessarily help if you've already gone this route, but if you're doing your business case to install an AMI system today, while it essentially makes the business case worse, you really should message that you're going to have to make these continuous improvements in it. Whether you put dollars in or whether that's something you really communicate well to the executives that are making the decision of this expectation. I think more realistically, it's hard to say I need some budget dollars for something I can't define today, but it's to help us make investments and improve. That sounds, very sort of hypothetical, and it's not likely to get you, frankly, a whole lot of money in the annual budget cycles. I think what you need to do is prove that you can get additional return on an investment. And so, unfortunately, I believe for a lot of utilities, it's doing a mini business case, if you will, on some aspect of an investment they can do today to get more value. Doing that, showing the value. Then when you go back the next year, you've got a bit of a track record, because it's a bit of a chicken and egg to get that budget dollars assigned to you.
Thank you, Kevin. So, Robert, getting back to this topic of how do you evaluate, what type of investments you're going to make. Can you talk about how Hydro Ottawa is addressing investments in either replacement efforts or upgrading new technology? How do you decide if you're going to replace something or upgrade to a new platform? And what is impacting capital investment decisions?
Absolutely. Again, just so that we can tell, we have a regulatory framework where Hydro Ottawa chooses to submit a 5-year rate plan. And then we have the OEB here in Ontario. They evaluate our rate plan. In those rate plans, we have to detail out all of the projects that we want to do, especially the larger projects. And these, as we all know, are multi-million-dollar projects over time. So how do we value that? So some of them are pretty easy. When the headend server, the headend supplier right now, it says to you, this is obsolete. Each year you continue with this, we're going to have to bump up how much you pay in maintenance fees because they don't want to carry it anymore, which makes total sense. They're trying to move through to the other one. It's a pretty easy business case to move to the new one as those O&M costs move forward. The other one is if they're discontinuing the meter you're using. So if you're not going to get that meter anymore, it's a pretty easy business case to say, we can't even purchase that meter anymore. The value is kind of amplified by the way, we're not going to be able to purchase that meter anymore. And we're able to provide the company an additional amount of value as we go forward. Not just the metering side, but multiple groups within the company be able to use this data, and we'll be able to make sure that we can streamline some of our processes that we have. So the business case a lot of the time is it's not available anymore. We need to move forward, which is something that I think a number of people are facing. And then the other is proving the value of what it'll look like, painting the picture to make sure people understand what it is that we're trying to do. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, yes, it does. And Kevin, now can you provide us some insight into what are some of the considerations you think utilities need to make before reaching a strategic investment decision? Because capital investment is usually rooted in really understanding the risk of it. So what are some of the considerations utilities should be making before they come to this decision to make the investment?
Yeah, good question. So if we look at the essence of an AMI solution, there's really 3 components. There's edge devices, which predominantly meters, but more than just meters. There's a network in the middle, and then there's the hidden system or computing device. More and more, we're seeing the industry turn to cloud-based headend systems. And this is a trend not just in AMI, but CIS systems, a lot of the core operational systems in utilities. The vendor markets and the utilities are more inclined to put those in the cloud. So from a capital standpoint, you're not having to worry about replacing servers every 3 or 5 years and have the disaster recovery sites and all that goes within the maintenance required for that. You've essentially outsourced that to either your AMI vendor or their partner, if you will. It's probably in Microsoft Azure or Amazon Web Services or something like that. So you're moving capital into more of a kind of a strategic partnership and an outsourcing. The other 2 key pieces, and Robert's talked quite a bit about the meter. In some ways, I kind of argue Measurement Canada has some opportunities because of their testing regime and their seal periods that Measurement Canada requires to maybe do some focused replacements because they're out there touching meters at some point to bring back meters for batch testing or to replace it because they've hit their seal period. But you've got to show that value of the meter. And really, if you've got a specific AMI system, then you've got specific meters that you can buy. And that's what you have available to you because that's the system you have. You've made a a partner decision years ago. So the network, and I know I rambled a little bit, but the network is the interesting one, is because most of these systems are proprietary in nature. They may have elements of standards-based, they may be IP-based, but they're not plug and play. A vendor's system is proprietary by design. There are interesting things going on in the marketplace related to LTE to the meter. You could think of this as 5G, but it's really not 5G. 5G is really the build out of a public LTE network. But the LTE standards that have evolved as part of 5G provide an opportunity for the market, for utilities and for vendors to look at how can I use cellular as the network as opposed to proprietary WAN LAN solution. And if you have an existing solution and you're looking at that upgrade or reinvestment, one of the challenges you're faced with is, well, if I want to change my core platform, then I have to build a whole new network. And now I'm operating two networks for a period of time until I make the transition. And I've got network devices, I've got different types of meters, et cetera. There's interest in looking at how can LTE be that transition, or how can I use LTE as the network to hit those use cases for those specific customer segments that I can get more value out of without having to add another network solution. So from a networking standpoint, I think that's the biggest piece. And you talk about risk. I think historically, utilities have been challenged putting core operational systems on public carriers. The public carriers keep replacing their technology on a life cycle that's shorter than utilities can deal with. They're not very dependable. With LTE, the utilities now potentially have some control over the network and the system. And that could be a game changer in terms of how utilities look at leveraging cellular technologies.
Yeah, we actually have been doing a look to see, is it right to just continue with what we've got here? Could we potentially carry two headends? What are some of the ways for us as Hydro Ottawa to diversify a little bit, not rely on the one company, the one system? And I'll tell you, it's really cost prohibitive to carry two headends. Headends are a massive investment, and then to carry two backhauls or the network, the communication networks. It would be lovely to put out a meter with a cell modem on it and just dial right back to the system. That'd be great. Maybe in Canada, they're going to allow us to have our own cell network on a band on one of the bands to allow us to have our own piece. We can host it. It'll be private, less security issues because everything's authenticated. It's only in the one side. So on our side, we're balancing cybersecurity requirements from our IT security team, what's available in the system and what's cost effective in the system. And it's pretty tough to kind of do anything but continue to invest in what you've done before. I do hope that we'll see, and Kevin and I talked about this on a pre-side before this, is maybe the industry itself opens up a little bit and there's a bit more of an open comm spec. The head end can still be hosted, but you're allowed to put more than just one or two different types of meters on that system. And so new to the metering world is what I am. I'm only about a year and a half in. Before that, I was on the stations station side of the business, distributed automation. So it's one of those things that we're looking for other options, but we as a utility feel a bit like we're on those tracks of the train. It's pretty tough to get on the other tracks.
I saw some questions come in already around communication networks and cybersecurity, so I expect both of you to be talking about those topics again when we get into audience Q&A. To that, thank you everyone who submitted questions already. We're going to take 10 more minutes to talk about our last topic, but then we will get into the audience Q&A. So if you have a question, go ahead and use that chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen to submit it. So we're going to close out our moderated discussion with me talking about something that's really exciting because you have a little bit more opportunity to be creative, and that's harnessing more power from the data that you currently have. So Robert, I'll start with you. Can you share with us some additional examples of how you guys at Hydro Ottawa have utilized data from your AMI system to make critical decisions? And have there been situations where the data you would like to be able to access is just not available, and maybe why was it not available?
Yeah. So with that, boy, there's a lot more of what I wish we could do than what we currently have the ability to do. Again, we invested very early. We get, so like the biggest stuff we get is we get voltage reports. We just started switching over on the mesh. We've actually got a few, again, it's more for billing side, but we're doing interval billing on the mesh, and that's been an interesting aspect for us because before we would have had dedicated communications to those. So what are we currently using? Not enough. Right now it's almost exclusively used for Metertocash. We're sending the information in, it goes to billing. We generate some billing reports. We generate some voltage reports, which allow us to send that over to our assets group to decide maybe someone's tapped a transformer up in the station. Well, 15 years ago, somebody had gone down because there was low voltage issues, and they tapped up all the transformers on that line. But now we've tapped it down for whatever reason, and we can go, hey, by the way, we're having voltage issues on these lines, and it's right on this feeder. So we can provide that information. We can go and correct that information. What do I hope to see in the future? I hope to see power quality reports. I hope to see analytics based on what time of day certain pieces of equipment are running. Like I said, it'd be lovely to have things like this virtual net metering where someone has purchased a plot of land. Not everybody can put a solar system or an offset generation somewhere, but they can put it in a field and people can have that as an offset to their operations. They still own it. Why can't we associate those two things together for them? There's a whole bunch of stuff that we got to work on with the regulator. I think the smart metering, the FLIZR information, if we are good enough at it and we know what our impedances are on our lines, we could even start looking at what a snapshot of an outage looks like and send back information to our system office, and they can say, looks like it's 2 kilometers out on that line, and pinpoint it for our crews to go out and have a look, see what it is. Maybe isolate that one section and keep everybody else on. So now our reliability goes up and we have less customer interruptions. I want to use anything. Like, what can we get from that system? Because right now it's only really the basics for us, right? We can do some remote disconnects, which is great, saves a truck roll, but we're really looking forward to this grabbing the data that we're going to be able to get out of our new investments and really sort of digging into it. That's where we're at.
Thanks, Robert. And Kevin, do you kind of see this the same way as Robert? And do you have any additional examples of how you think utilities could better use or leverage AMI data?
Yeah, I think that the position that Robert suggested that Hydro Ottawa is in, that it's primarily Metertocash. I think for that generation of AMI solutions, that really that was the justification. It's a Metertocash replacement. I think back then, a decade ago, we identified a lot of other potential qualitative opportunities that the utilities have had. Some of those have come into mainstream, others haven't. We had identified that being able to bring outage information back and bringing it into outage management systems was very powerful. Some of the initial efforts, we learned industry-wise, if you bring back all the outages from the AMI system, you crash the outage management system. Okay, so you need to do some filtering, you need to do some data management before you put that in. I think over the last few years, what we've seen is, if you look at the broader kind of grid modernization, smart grid area, a lot of utilities are looking at distribution operations systems such as advanced distribution management as kind of an umbrella over FLIZR and advanced outage management and things. Those systems require a a lot of things, but at the heart, a very accurate electric connectivity model. So they know how's the system connected, and then data. They're just, they suck in data. And AMI solutions are ideal systems because they provide, well, who has power, who doesn't have power, loading information, and so we can do a lot more with feeding those, what I'll call almost artificial intelligence and the algorithms and heuristics of ADMS solutions by bringing back AMI data. To Robert's point, some of the earlier systems, you're limited in what you can bring back because that's how the meters and the networks were designed. You can't bring back a significant amount more data without upgrading your networks. Depending on your system design, that could be relatively easy or extremely expensive. And so you've got to look at, well, what's the value of that data? Looking kind of to the future, I think that one of the huge trends going on in the industry across North America is sustainability or net carbon zero initiatives, increase of distributed generation, renewables, more customer meter side generation, storage, et cetera. What we're going to see is a distribution grid that has aspects that looks more like the transmission grid that we've known. A lot of different generation sources, third-party sources. So how are the utilities going to operate that distribution grid? So those ADMS solutions are one area. Another, though, is from a forecasting standpoint. Most utilities, have the requirement of delivering safe, reliable, economic power. So they've got to forecast, what those needs are. The AMI network is primarily suited, ideally, to do that, but we're not really using that today because we haven't had the need. But looking to the future, I don't. Farther in the future, it may be more, quote, real time, but the networks aren't real time today. But day ahead forecasting into the market that right now is done at the transmission level. I couldn't see that rolling down and doing it at the distribution level, which means now your requirements on your AMI system and your use cases are profoundly different than, well, I need to get the data within a couple of days to generate a bill.
Thank you, Kevin. We do have a few minutes. Robert, was there anything you wanted to add before we move on to Q&A? I did see some laughing and head nodding while Kevin was talking there.
I always learn something when I'm talking to Kevin. So it's this was as much a learning experience for me as I'm sure for anybody else watching. So I appreciate that. I just agree with a lot of those things. Like I'm a guy that wants to be there already. So the problem is that we need to plan it properly. We need to make sure we stage it correctly so that the investment we're making gets us a return. Again, you can't just pull all the meters and put them all in, or double up on everything and then switch to a new system. It doesn't work like that. And so we live in the real world. We plan for the real world, and some of the stuff that Kevin was talking about, I wrote some of that down. I make sure that these are things that we're covering when we're doing our planning.
Very good. Okay, so with that, I did promise our audience we would take the last 15 minutes for Q&A. So let's go ahead and get into our Q&A for today. Let's start here. So we have our first question come in. I'm going to reword it a little bit. So how do you go about evaluating whether you build a proprietary fan or using other communication networks like 3G, 4G to get the data in and out? Does anybody want to take a first stab at that?
So I can do that, and then Robert can add, because I know that they've looked at this also from an upgrade standpoint. So I'll parse this a little bit. I think that it's a slightly different answer whether you're at the very front end and you're making your initial AMI investment, or whether you have a system and you're looking at it more from a reinvestment standpoint. And to touch on a comment that you had made, Aaron, that an element of this capital planning is risk management. And so I mentioned that for the most part, AMI solutions are proprietary networks. That there's a reason for that, though, not just because the AMI vendors want to get you and control what you can buy. That really wasn't the intent. It was because you're dependent on them to create a solution that is secure, and that manages risk. And so the proprietary aspects of the networks really are because the vendors design solutions that they could do a better job of controlling and ensuring that the products and the solutions that you needed would be there for the 10, 15-year, 20-year horizon. Because again, going back to the 20 years ago, there weren't a whole lot of public solutions in the marketplace, standards-based solutions that you could turn to for these large-scale deployments. And so that was a risk management perspective. Now, though, if you talk to the vendor community, yes, they have one or in some cases several proprietary networks that they support and sell, but public networking, LTE essentially standards is a part of everything that they have or looking at, and that's true of electric, gas, and water. And we didn't really touch on the different commodities, but from the standpoint of a water or a gas utility, one of their biggest challenges is they don't own above ground facilities on which to install a network. So being able to use a public network has obvious advantages. Even for electric utilities, though, and I think this is especially true if they're looking at reinvestment, not having to put in a second network if they're transitioning and not just reinvesting is hugely beneficial, because it isn't just operating those two headend systems. It's your billing system needs to know, well, where's that meter read coming from? It's different types of information. So, this meter can provide this certain outage information, but this meter can't. And so all the systems tend to get much more complex because they need to know where's the data coming from, or if not, where's it coming from? What type of data is coming from the different meters? And so LTE, cellular really was not necessarily a risk reduction approach in the past, but it absolutely can be now as the market matures, as more vendors produce product. And one of the comments Robert made, and he and I talked before about this, is when in the early days of AMI, most of the utilities, most of the contracts were written, obligated the vendor to support 2, 3, maybe even 4 different meter platforms, because utilities were concerned about single source and the risk associated with that. As we've had consolidation in the industry, as we've gone to really more captive metering within AMI vendors, if you will, there's less independent meter manufacturers. And what we've seen is utilities didn't exercise that ability to buy 2, 3, 4 different meters, because the meter shops and the technology aspects of the utility said, I don't want to have my people have to learn all these different metering programs and testing regimes. I just want to buy the meter from this meter manufacturer because we like them, it's quality, it works for us. And so that particular risk, which was identified early on, you could argue it's either gone away or just that the importance of that risk has been decreased. But now that you're looking at making these reinvestments, it's becoming more prevalent, because maybe the use case you have and the meter you'd like to have, you actually don't have the ability to buy because that's not supported on your system.
Robert, do you have any additional thoughts there? It sounds like it's something that you guys came up against at Hydro Ottawa.
Yeah, the whole, like, how are we going to do the communications moving into the future is still ongoing. We still talk about it. We have chosen, and we're going to invest in a specific, like the pole top collectors. That is what we're going to call stage one, and it is our first investments. And we're going to go until that investment has earned itself back. We're going to get that until it's depreciated, right? But that doesn't mean that we're not looking. What does 7 years look like from now? What does 10 years look like from now? We've learned now we're definitely going to have to do this again. If we've got to do it this time, we're definitely going to do it again. And likely we don't get the 12 years or the 10 years that we got this time. We might have to go the next stage. Like what comes in and disrupts the industry? So how do you evaluate? You can evaluate till you're blue in the face, but at some point you have to go, okay, this is going to provide value. We're going to select this and we're going to justify it based on this 7-year or this 10-year piece. We brought in a company like Black & Veatch to help us out because you need people that are seeing a wider picture than just what we are. But I currently have meetings with our IT group and our grid optimization group to see, okay, is there a way that we can get all these devices on one network instead of the DA devices are going to be on one network. The meters are on one network. We're going to have people in the field on a different network. Maybe there's a way for us to consolidate that. So that's an ongoing piece. For us, it was making sure that we didn't become so paralyzed by the decision that we didn't actually move forward and get the value for our customers and ourselves. I hope that's a good answer for the person. That's a very direct piece. But it's going to be forever. Like and a lot of the things that we do, you have to constantly make sure that the path is right. You can't just set the path and 20 years come back and be like, great. You have to constantly evaluate as you go.
I found another question. I'm kind of jumping around here, but I really like this one, and I think it's important. Robert, if you could take a stab at it first, and then Kevin offer some insight. What is your data governance approach for AMI? You have your head system, but I'm sure multiple business areas are wanting to access information simultaneously. What mechanisms are offered to those business units to pull data in the app of their choice?
Wow. So far, because of where we're at, everything flows through my team. I don't just have the meter shop and the metering group. I have the MDS, so meter data services, that's actually pulling all of the billing data, making sure it's good and sending it off to get correlated and sent to our Metertocash group to be able to bill the customers. Right now, it's with us. We validate the data. We ensure that it's correct. We make sure the communications are on. If not, we send somebody out to go and have a look. What does that look like in the future? I'm going to need a lot more people if we keep doing it that way. So I think what we may need to do, and some of the plans, I don't want to go too far into it, but we do have some ideas within the company about building out the way I see my group evolving in general. It's not just going to be metering systems anymore, right? It's going to be data systems. It's going to be all the data in the system that needs to be looked at. It needs to be validated, and then it needs to be sent to the correct area. There's going to be consultations with groups to see how automated that process can be. I'm sure that it can be a lot more automated than we have it today. So we are working on that. Do I have a direct answer for that one right now? No, because we're still talking about how that's all going to look after about 5 years from now, when we are pulling all of this stuff and we are filtering it out to all those groups.
And Kevin, what are your thoughts, around just data governance?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Again, one of the advantages of being old is you can kind of look back in time. We talked a lot in the past around kind of system of record for the AMI data. What was the AMI headend the system of record for? What was the meter data management system record for? What was the CIS, et cetera? And as we've seen integration of these platforms, now you have CIS systems that have embedded, meter data management systems as part of the platform, and same with AMI solutions. That concept of system of record probably isn't as helpful as it might have been in the past. One of the issues, though, is part of the question was, if you've got multiple people trying to access the data, it's not just data governance. It's how do you technically make the data available to different users in a way that doesn't impact your operational needs. For instance, if we look at a meter data management system and you're doing the morning aggregation of all the meter reads and packaging it up to send a billing, and then someone decides to do an all meter query, at the very least, you're going to slow production. You can take the system down. And so what a lot of utilities learned early on is, okay, you can't do that. So maybe you have a mirrored database. You have a kind of an operational database, and then you have a data store that is not really an archive, but an online data store where you can actually use for queries. And to Robert's point, trying to get as many of those queries more kind of non-human, but systems-based, where they're highly efficient and they can be managed, time sliced. The other is just the name meter data management system is a misnomer today, and I wish we could call it something else. When it was designed, it was really designed because the AMI systems, they didn't collect 100% of the data. They weren't perfect. And billing systems were used to ingesting either manual reads or AMR reads that were, you had to read for most meters. And so the exceptions were pretty low. And so meter data management systems were originally designed to kind of bridge that gap, if you will. That need isn't there anymore, but they've become, then we use them to manage integration, if you will, of all the various systems. So one of the challenges utilities have, if they have these systems in place today, is what would my data governance be if I could do it differently? And so if you're going to make reinvestments, it isn't just the AMI network. It could be a meter data management system, or you're fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to be doing a billing system upgrade. As while you're thinking of this, how do you take advantage of that? From a data governance perspective, not just a system technology perspective.
So I want to try to squeeze one more question in. We do just have 3 minutes, so I need some brief answers from you guys. And it's around DER and prosumers integration. How do you expect DERs and prosumer integration to affect these networks? And whoever wants to go first can go first.
I'll go first. I will try to be brief. That's a challenge. I think we're still figuring that out. I think, years past, we went down the Zigbee train. That Zigbee was going to be the technology solution that was allow us to integrate all these different devices in, have high engagement with consumers. What we learned is consumers really don't want a high engagement with their utility for the most part. Zigbee may not have been the best technology choice. So when we're looking at DER integration, prosumers, what is it that they want? What is it those customer segments want? If I put a DG, a solar or battery on my house, what is it I want from my utility? I think in the past we've taken it from the standpoint of what can we give them? What can we do from an industry standpoint? We need to do a better job of looking at what they need, and that may be based on the market design in that area, or it may be integrating in with the manufacturer of those systems as opposed to the actual consumers themselves.
I would just call my my colleague Rad Abdullah, because he's working on the great DR here, Hydro Ottawa, and he's leading a lot of that. So really, though, I think they're going to want to, people want feedback, so they want to understand what are they using, how is it going to impact their grid. Depending on what our regulator does, it could impact it massively. If they open it wide open and put in incentives for people to put in these DER systems, it's going to be a major impact. Again, we'll see what the future has, but we have to be prepared for that. So we've got to be able to plan for.
Thank you both. So that wraps us up. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Kevin, for sharing your insights with us today. And I want to thank the audience for attending. I apologize that we couldn't get to all of your great audience questions. We just didn't have the time. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, the full replay will be available shortly. So if you missed anything, you can watch the full replay. That wraps us up. Thank you all again for attending, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much, Aaron.